Hello, everyone. Welcome to the When at Work podcast show with your host, Julian Lee here. And today I'm joined by the fabulous Bill Flynn from Boston. Welcome to the show, Bill.
Thanks, Julian. Great to be here.
Now, Bill, you have done lots and lots of exciting things in the tech world, going back many years, in fact. Do you want to tell us a little bit about your history, particularly the email server, critical email business that you were involved in, how you got into that, because it was kind of unusual, and some of the challenges that you experienced with that and what you learned from it.
Sure. So I've basically had two sort of arcs to my career, if you will. The first being startups. In the early 90s, I started working in startups, and I did 10 over the next 25 years, give or take, which was a blast. I really enjoyed doing it. I love the whole figuring it out from scratch and the puzzle of what a startup really is. And I was lucky enough to be at the forefront of a number of things that were going on in tech. Speech recognition in the early 90s was a pretty new thing. E-commerce in the mid 90s, affiliate marketing in the late 90s, mobile, right? Beginning of mobile as a burgeoning platform for people. And then the second arc of my career is coaching. And coaching, basically what I do is I work primarily with leadership teams, and I help them fill in a growth framework that I have come to use and sort of cobble together from a number of different sources that are I think really strong, mostly using something called Scaling Up, which is based upon Mastering the Rockefeller Habits book, which was written 30 some odd years ago. And I do that primarily. I do some one-on-one executive coaching as well. You have a question?
No, that's. I want to talk about scaling in a moment, and I just want to talk about what you did with that particular business, where you came in as more of a sales marketing person, and the founder wanted to basically sell out. Is that right? And you took over, and then
Yeah.
you had a few major disasters that you overcame. And do you want to tell us a bit about that story?
Sure, yeah. And that's sort of how I get into coaching, which is usually the tie that I do between the two. So between startup 5 and 6, I took some time off. I'd done pretty well. I was actually 5 for 6 at that point, or 4 for 5, I think, at that point. And
would this be in the sort of .com boom era, or
this was 2000 and 2007, 2008.
Okay.
I think was when I did that. So not quite in the middle of the boom, which was late 90s, if you will. But it had a resurgence, I think, after the bubble burst and everything.
Yeah.
So I went into this company in between startups as a consultant, and the founder, I was introduced through a mutual friend, and he said, "Look, I need you to make me look as big as you possibly can, because I want to sell this thing." He was tired. He'd been doing it for years and pretty much been handling it himself. He had certain partners and people, but it was pretty much his baby, and he wanted to take a break. So I came in. I helped grow the sales staff. I had done some other things as well. I took over marketing eventually, and within a year or so, a company came in and bought him. A company called Mindshift, which was a relatively large U.S.-based IT services company. And I officially took over as the GM. So I was asked when the founder left to take over the entire division. And that first day, which was July 4th or 5th, 2009, was, I describe it as the best and the worst day of my professional life. Worst day was that this technical infrastructure that was built around this email hosting business, which for those of you who aren't familiar, email hosting was a different animal years ago. It's not as we see it now, where you can just sort of get on Google or Microsoft Office 365, whatever, and you can outsource your data center. You had to have your own servers, etc. So that technical infrastructure that was built to support that around the Microsoft technology collapsed due to volume. It was the first day of the year, and people came back from work after a long holiday break, and the volume just crushed us. So we really didn't deliver email for about 2.5 days. It was a bit
And
of a
we're
trickle.
talking big companies are not able to send emails, critical emails, sales emails. They're not able to function. So, what are your customers doing? Are they freaking out? Obviously.
Yeah, so they freaked out. They left. I think we lost about 1,000 customers or so in the first week. We were getting yelled at on a regular basis.
Oh,
And I and the team had to, assuage and tell people that, we understand it's being fixed, et cetera. And about, again, about 2.5 days in, we at least fixed it to a degree that it would work. And we accelerated our plans to upgrade the infrastructure, which was being upgraded anyway. But we also had 2 or 3 really large partners. One was called Ingram Micro. For those of you who are not familiar, it's a very large distributor of technology services and hardware and software. And then a company called Endurance, which many people didn't know of, but they bought Constant Contact for $1 billion a few years ago. So these are some pretty big partners who were unhappy with us. So I and my president of the company that bought us went around, et cetera, and tried to make everyone understand what happened and that we were fixing it. But during that, I had a team of people. I had 2 new managers that were brought in to help me run the division, and some of them hadn't really managed teams before. None of us had really been in this crisis mode, which really went on for weeks to months. So I got together with everyone and said, look, I'm technically adept, but I've never run a technical infrastructure before. I have no idea how to do that. I've never run customer service before. I have no finance background. So I can't really tell you what to do. So I'm not going to, but I would like to talk about, where we see this as an outcome. What would it look like when we're done, right? And we've done all the things that we want to do. You could call it a vision, but it's probably too big of a word for what I was talking about. But it was a mini vision, if you will. And let's discuss, debate, and decide that. And then I need you all to individually draw your roadmaps for each group that you were leading, of where you are today, where we end up, and what you need along the way, so we can work together to make that happen. It wouldn't be perfect, but we work together, and that worked phenomenally well. It at the time I didn't know it, but I was building my own sort of EOS model. For those of you who are familiar with EOS, which is a business operating system you can use. It's mostly focused on execution, which is what we were focused on. I wasn't smart enough to know that there were business operating systems already out there that I could have used, but I had been researching business for years. I had some really good CEOs. I sort of cobbled together this system, and the numbers are great. We turned the business around relatively quickly. We actually doubled its size in about 2 years or so. I didn't lose one employee. Our customer satisfaction ratings went from about a 58% approval rate to, I think it was about 92 or 94% approval rate when I left. So that was the seed of coaching, because that's what I basically did. Is I was a coach. I didn't have answers. I had questions, and I helped the team work together pretty well. And I had a really good team, which helped a tremendous amount. So that's sort of the story of how we did it.
A thing about scaling, obviously from that experience, is that where you would really, you learned the, how to do it successfully?
I don't think it was any one instance. I'm relatively curious, and I love to learn. So I was always trying to learn from every experience that I had with the startups, running sales and marketing or service, et cetera. I think that was a culmination of the things where I applied what I learned to date. Now, having that experience and then looking back on it now, knowing what I know, I didn't know nearly as much as I thought I did. In that experience, but I had enough knowledge that it worked. But I also now know that it's a larger picture, especially if you want to scale over the long term and endure. This was sort of a nice fix. In about 1.5 to 2 years, we turned everything around and got it growing. But there's a lot. I now know that there's a lot more to the story than just what we did.
Yeah, and scaling is the critical thing, I guess, the wall that people hit. And is that the number one thing that you're helping people with now with your coaching business, how to scale?
Yeah. So what I do is my marketing tagline is I help humble, hungry leaders who are comfortable challenging the status quo take the guesswork out of growth. There seems to be a way to grow. If you look at great businesses that have lasted for not just years or decades even, but for centuries, they do the same few things really well. And that's what I teach. And I put it inside a growth framework where you can walk through and build out a plan to help you and your team get better and better at growing the business and taking a lot more of the guesswork out. So that's sort of what I do. Yeah.
The growth framework, we'll go through that. And before we do, that's what works. What is it that people sort of are chasing that is not working as far as growing? What are some of the things that are just causing people to be stuck?
Yeah, so there are two sort of main phases that I've seen with businesses. One is a startup phase, and then the next, if you want it, is a scaling up phase. There's a phase in the middle which you could call a lifestyle business, where you just want to grow enough, and it sort of feeds your needs as an entrepreneur, which we won't talk about. But scaling up and starting up and scaling up are two completely different animals, which I've learned. There's a great saying by Steve Blank that I talk about a lot, which is this definition of a startup is a temporary organization in search of a business model. And that's really your job as a startup founder, in my opinion. Because I've had the success, and I'm known at least in the Boston area a little bit, or people hear, oh, you've been done 10 startups, you're 5 for 10. I've been through 2 IPOs and 7 acquisitions. The first thing they say is, or one of the things they say is, what advice do you have? What can you tell me? Give me the one pearl of wisdom that you have. And I tell them the same thing. It's really 2 pearls of wisdom, which is one, your job is to find a problem worth solving it in a way that enough people will pay you money to make a real business. That's your main thing. It is not to convince people of how smart you are, how great your idea is, et cetera. It has nothing to do with you if you want to be a good startup founder. The second thing I say is, don't run out of money. Be very smart about how you spend your money and how you spend your time. And I think most startups fail. Many startups should fail, right? You just guess wrong. You're not picking the right market. You're not picking the right target. There isn't a problem we're solving in that world. We saw that through the late 90s. There were many problems that weren't worth solving, but a lot of things were fed. I think the poster
Too
child
much money.
Yeah, poster child that was pets.com, right? Or Webvan, right? Webvan, I think it was a problem we're solving, is getting groceries to your door. We've now seen it, but they didn't solve it in the right way, and they ran out of money. So that's one animal. The second is scaling, and when I talk about scaling, I say, look, when you've got through that product market fit not whole, you found a problem with solving. There's some repeatability and scalability to your business. Jeffrey Moore would say you've kind of crossed the chasm, or it looks like you're going to cross the chasm, and you won't fall into the crevasse. You have to go back and revisit all of your key critical decisions to make sure that they still apply moving forward, because the first customers that work with you are just as crazy as you are, and they're not necessarily the next set of customers who are going to get you to scaling. So you have to go revisit those things. And the next thing you have to do is really understand your team. Do you have the right team in place? Would you now enthusiastically rehire the team that you have in place to take you forward? Because the skills and the abilities and the knowledge and the interest of the first team isn't necessarily what's going to get you to be a scaling business. So that is what I talk about in general. And then if you've had that team in place, or you're getting that team in place, the next most important thing is you have to understand that your business is one big system made up of subsystems and components. And your job is to figure out how the systems work together and how they influence each other, and work on each of those things. And there's not one way to do it. Just like in a home is basically one big system. You're heating and cooling this one system in the envelope. And if you put more insulation in the walls, or you build the infrastructure in a certain way, you don't need as much horsepower in your heating or ventilation, because you've created a different environment. However, if you have a lot of windows, or it's not a well-built house, you've got a lot of situations that are affecting the temperature, then you have to put a little more horsepower in. So same thing with a business system. If you have a decent strategy, but you have a really well-oiled team that executes really well, that may get you to be where you want to be, because when you execute on your strategy, you find out where the holes are, you get better, and you keep working together as a team, versus having a really great strategy and not a great team. I talk to my leaders all the time, and I say, look, we can do all the work here together, and you can do a wonderful job. These 8, 9, 10 times we meet in a year and have a great time. But if your team isn't taking this and applying it to the day to day, or they're not holding each other accountable, they're not doing the things outside of the work that we do together, on these offsites, then you're not going to be getting the fullest benefit of what we do. So that's to me the key to scaling up. Is there are 3 things that are most important: your team, this sort of strategy and execution system that you're building, that work together and influence each other. And lastly, back to cash, is if you want to grow, cash should be your primary financial growth metric, not revenue, not even profit. There's a great saying that's oversaid, but it's fun to say, which is revenue is vanity, profit is sanity, and cash is king. Cash is the only thing that won't lie to you on your P&L or your balance sheet. Either you have it or you don't. And if you want to scale, you need it before you scale. So you have to plan of how much money you need to make to do the things you want to do to get to where you want to be, to grow the business to a certain size and get you closer to that vision that you had when you first started it.
Yeah, the team thing is really, seems to be one of the hardest ones, is getting people that are able to execute. And like you said, execution trumps, just maybe you've got this great process, this great business, but if the team's not working, it's not always the best product that wins. More often it's the best team that can execute, isn't it?
Agreed. Yeah, and Microsoft has proven that over the last 30 years, right? They were always they were hardly ever a leading technology company. They were, and if you look at how they started as an operating system, they actually just reverse engineered someone else's operating system that got them started. And there used to be a joke in the 80s and 90s and even in 2000, is that you had to wait for the 3rd version of whatever Microsoft product was out, because that's the one that actually worked. The 2 before that weren't necessarily that great. So being a laggard is certainly okay. But you make a really good point, is the team is pretty much everything. In most businesses, and in most situations in general, the team is what gets things done, right? There's been some research that somewhere around 80 some odd percent of the people that work in businesses are on at least one team. A large majority of those people are on 2 teams or more. So understanding how to attract and shape and grow a team is a tremendous skill that I don't think we really teach our leaders. It's sort of like parenthood. We have kids and, it's like, just, you'll figure it out. There's skill to being a good parent, and some parents are better than others, right? And some learn from their own parents, some learned in other ways. I think the same thing as team leaders. You have to really understand what it means to be a great team leader. And I think more businesses should spend a lot more time teaching the folks that are potentially going to be team leaders. But in many cases, people will take over a team that just pops up, and they don't have any skills to do that. So I agree. It's a tremendous skill to have, because we as human beings, we are highly irrational, impulsive, emotional beings. And if you think that, especially an engineer or someone like that, everyone thinks rationally, we just don't. No one does. There's plenty of studies now that we have fMRI machines in the last 10 or 15 years, where we can see parts of the brain that light up when decisions are made and other things are made. And we have found that we have 150 or so unconscious biases that affect us on a daily basis. So I like to say, if you don't understand at least the basics of neuroscience and how the brain works a little bit, you're always working at a deficit, because we people, me included, we're all a little crazy. And you have to understand that.
Yeah, that irrationality, it makes me think of, I guess, back at the startup phase, one of the traps that people have is, well, first of all, as you said, you need to make sure that you're actually solving a problem that people will pay for you to solve. And so you need to make sure that there is a need for it, and you are doing something good that people want. And the other thing is that irrationality is that sometimes with the people that are the engineers that are building, they get so caught up in the product, and they, especially the small startups, they avoid doing the marketing, I guess, side of things, and they just keep working on new features and new features that maybe people don't really want.
Yeah.
Because it's
Yeah.
the fear of actually executing. They want to stay in the safe zone of building with Lego.
Yeah. Well, I think also part of it is that irrationality is we don't want to be told that our baby is ugly. And to really understand if you're solving someone's problem, you have to go out and ask them, is this working for you? What problem are you having? Is what we're doing of value to you? Is it helping you to make your life better? Is it progressing you forward? Is it solving a struggle? I worked as a consultant in between some of these startups and such. And there was one group that I worked with. I went on 3 sales calls over about a week or two, and I was just sort of to be an observer, etc. And one of the founders I went with the same guy because he was sort of the sales guy. And after each of these meetings, he came and said pretty much the same phrase, which is, they just don't get it. And after the third time I heard that from him, I said, your sentence is perfect. I said, but your pronouns are wrong. They don't have to get it. It's your job to get them. It's your job to understand, their struggles, right? People love to complain and tell you their problems, and that's really good stuff for you. Then you can apply your magic and figure out, is there something here we can make that will help make their life better? Either make the thing they're using, we can make a different version of it that's better. We can have them look at a completely different thing. The iPhone is used as an iconic example of that, right? Is that no one really thought about combining a phone and a browser and a camera and the other things. And it was said, I think Steve Ballmer famously said, this iPhone thing is not going to go anywhere. And who wants all those things in one place, right? And guess what? He was completely wrong. And now we can't live without the things. So, everywhere you go, someone has this device. Because one of the things I really loved about Steve Jobs is that he was an extremely curious human being, and he loved simplicity, right? So it was his background that got him there. And there's a story, I don't know if it's true, but it certainly is illustrative of the situation. Is he didn't go to people and say, hey, how can I make a better Walkman for you? Because the iPod and iTunes and such were kind of the first foray into what he was doing to make Apple what it is today. Because they would have told him and he would have done it, and they probably wouldn't have valued it, right? But he said, why do you use that? What does it do for you? How is it making your life better? And then he said, where is it letting you down? Right. And people would say, oh, I love having it with me. I can pick my own songs. I sort of have my own little radio, if you will, with me. But let's assume that it's the CD version of it, right? It's kind of bulky. I've got to have all these CDs that I carry with me. I only like 2 or 3 songs on each one. It skips if I'm running or doing anything, etc. And he took that and said to the folks at, I forget where it was, IDEO or Idea Labs or whatever. He went back to them and said, look, I want you to make an MP3 player with the Apple design, which is amazingly simple and simply amazing. And I want you to put 1,000 songs that fit in someone's pocket. Go make one of those. And I understand that they had the design, but the disc wasn't, Toshiba, I think, made the disc. It wasn't big, it wasn't small enough. So they had to wait till they designed one that was smaller so it could be in your pocket. It was too big of an MP3 player. And then they released it, and sort of the rest is history, so to speak. But that's what I think founders have to be. You have to be highly curious. You have to not fall in love with your idea, but fall in love with the problem and the customer who's having the problem. And that will at least give you a chance of making it. It's not going to guarantee anything for you. You still may not find your way there, but it increases your chances of getting to a place where you are solving a problem. Because most of the time, the original idea that you had is not the one that makes a business successful. It's pretty rare that someone like a Waze, right, who pretty much started with, how do I do this thing? And what they had as an original idea made it. Most businesses don't do that. They find their way there. They stumble their way to success, but they're not tied emotionally to that original idea and trying to convince people how great they are.
Steve Jobs, it was the genius of, like you say, understanding what the people want and delivering it. And as you say, that is how you need to design your product based on what people want. And this leads into, as you as a marketing guy, this leads on to how you actually market and sell. And it's the exact same thing, isn't it? It's speaking to all of those frustrations and what people want in your messaging. So it's not just the formation of the product, it's also how you sell it.
Yeah, if you do that work up front and you really understand your core customer, and you're okay slicing the market into a group of people that really value what you do, because there are lots of ways that people solve problems. And if you try to solve all of them for everybody, you sort of become this watered down business. Most businesses that do really well start off with a really small niche, right? There's this company called Winterhalter, which makes dishwashers. And you could do residential dishwashers, you could do commercial dishwashers, you could do high end, low end, et cetera. They picked sort of higher end hotels and restaurants, and they went to them and said, "What do you love about your dishwasher? What do you not love about your dishwasher?" And what they heard was that while it's a great device and it makes things easier, it's not getting the plates and dishes and glasses clean. We often have to send it through several times, or we have to have a human being, sort of finish that off. So they went and researched the problem, and they found out that it was mostly the temperature of the water. So they had to really make the temperature of the water better, higher. But then they found that when they did that, it made the dishes cleaner, but it melted the dishwashing liquid faster than it could get its job done. So they actually had to then go back and re-engineer dishwashing liquid. And so they kept solving the problem in a deeper and deeper way. And they pretty much own, as far as I can tell, that market segment. Then they went to go to wider. And the same thing, I mean, Apple did the same thing. They started with the iPod and the iTunes, and then they went to the iPhone, and then they went to the iPad, and now we get the watch. It's amazing. You can apply your general principles to your business, but really homing in on a particular market segment. So I think what I had read is when Apple became the first $1 trillion company, or one of the first $1 trillion companies, they only had like a 7 to 10% market share. They didn't own much of the market, but they had a 70% profit share. They had most of the profit. So you can. It's not about being big unless it's an ego thing. It's about making money, so you can then keep your business going, take care of your great employees, do all those wonderful things that you can do to invest in your business and your people, and that takes cash, and that's what I mentioned earlier. So, yeah, I agree that that's an important factor, right? Fall in love with that problem.
Another good thing you touched on was the working out specifically exactly the people that you want to speak to, not trying to be everything to everybody, because that never works.
Exactly.
Bill, I'm going to just quickly focus in on so what you're doing with Catalyst. Is it Catalyst Growth Partners?
Advisors, yeah.
And basically, you're all about helping people build a good team and build the culture within the organization. And who are you specifically working with mostly? Who's your ideal people?
So the ideal customer for me is the head of the company, is really the person who brings me on, and I work with his or her team, but primarily that leader, head of company, CEO, business owner, whatever you want to call it, is my main person. And it's not necessarily an industry or a size of company or whatever. It's a mindset. And I mentioned it a little bit earlier. So when people say, who's your perfect client, your ideal client, it is a humble, hungry learner who leads an organization and is comfortable challenging the status quo. If you aren't those things, I can't really help you fully. If you think you have to have all the answers, or you have to tell people what to do, as Jim Collins says, you're the genius with 1,000 helpers, then that will get you so far, right? Because when you're smaller, that's okay. But as you grow, it becomes impossible. There's a reason that there's a bottleneck at the top of the bottle, right? Is if you become that bottleneck, then you're the reason the business isn't growing. But most leaders who look at that, we often say when there are too many people who take credit when things go well and blame outside forces when things don't go well. If you find yourself doing that, then very likely you're the problem. You're the person who is getting in the way. You haven't created an autonomous environment and hired people who are better at you at that job that you hired them for than you are. Um, you haven't created an environment of psychological safety so people can, can experiment. They can make mistakes. They can say, I'm sorry. They can say, I don't know. I need help. Those are the great teams, right? Amy Edmondson has done some tremendous research on teams, and she found that her original premise was wrong. She thought that the best teams were the ones that made the fewest mistakes. And then when she did her research, which was, I think, in operating theaters and hospitals and such, she found that it wasn't the ones that made the fewest mistakes. It was the ones that admitted the most mistakes that they could correct. And actually, the ones that looked like they made the fewest mistakes made as many or more. They just didn't admit it.
Yeah.
They didn't want to be seen that way. And if you're not humble, that's what happens, right?
Yeah.
You have to realize you're a human being, you're flawed.
Ego is the enemy here, isn't it, Bill?
Yeah. Yeah. Ego is the enemy in many cases.
And how do people get involved in what you're doing if they want to get some help? Is it it's not just startups? It's people that are stuck in various stages of growth. It's and what do they do? Do you have like a strategy call or something?
Yeah, so I have a process. So I talk to the leader, and basically I say, look, this isn't for the faint of heart. You have to be bought into this because it's a process that we're teaching everyone, and you have to trust the process. And are you okay with that? Also, I have to make you understand that I come in, and not that I'm doing this on purpose, but in pretty much every situation I've been in, the team that I start with is never the team that is the one we end up with. Very likely, one or more of the people leave. Usually, it's of their own accord because I'm like sunlight. I'm a disinfectant, right? I come in, I ask questions, really basic questions. We talk about accountability, and we get very specific on our accountability. And some people don't like that, or they find out that the thing that they thought they were building is not what was happening. So if they say that's great, no, I like that, I'm okay with that. The next is that I then walk them through the framework that we're going to go through over the next year and a half or 2 years, build out this one-page plan and all the supporting stuff with that. And then if that goes well, I actually come in for about 90 minutes, either virtually or live if that's possible. And I walk the team through that. So I have the CEO and his or her team in this meeting. I walk them through what I walked the CEO through in the previous one. And then we do about a 45-minute exercise, which goes through a checklist of things that I've found are necessary to be in place and be good at to have an enduring company, or to have a company that has the highest enterprise value or exit value. And then after that, if we're still on board, then we move ahead and then do the work.
Awesome. So if you want to reach out to Bill, his website, I've got it on the screen there, catalystgrowthadvisors.com. I'll put all his social media stuff on the blog in a few days, or maybe even a few weeks, depending on how I go. And I'd like to thank you for coming on, Bill. That was fascinating.
Great. Thanks for having me on. And Catalyst Growth Advisors is a great place to go. I'm often asked, how do people reach you? My information is on there. I actually have a book I've written called Further Faster. You can download a book for free on there. You can also get it on Amazon and Audible. I do twice a month. I do a little 1 to 2 minute do it yourself kind of post. And the book itself is also a do it yourself book. It takes the key things that I've learned and distills it down into a number of exercises. I think there are 25 exercises to go with the book as well. So that's a great place to connect with me. So thanks for that.
Yeah, grab the book. It's a good place to start. And I love reading people's books. Great lead magnets too, aren't they, Bill?
Yep, I love them.
Wonderful. All right. Thanks, everyone, for listening. I hope you enjoyed that. I did. And I'll see you very soon on another episode. Thanks, Bill.
Thank you, sir.
Once I've got some content for you, I will send you an email once it's all published.
Sounds terrific. Thanks for having me on.
Have a great day.
Really appreciate it. You too. Cheers. Have a good weekend.
And go Boston.
And where are you? I didn't ask where are you?
I'm in Perth. Do you know where Perth is?
Yep. It's the only, I haven't been to the west coast of Australia, but I've been to Sydney and Cairn, and I've been out to the reef. I've been to Alice Springs as well in the middle.
Oh wow, you've certainly
Yeah.
probably seen more than I have.
Yeah, that I've been to Melbourne. I didn't never get to Melbourne and Perth. And then the
Uh
top, is it Kakadu or what's the
yeah, that would be great to go up there. My dad just went up there. But yeah, and they've got all these beautiful waterlands and crocodiles and like Aboriginal tribes basically living the way they always have, pretty much. You know, it's pretty cool.
Yeah, yeah. There's just so you know, are you familiar with Brad Giles?
No.
So Brad Giles is a coach that is in Perth. He and I have been coaches in the same organization over the years. I think it'd be a great guest if you want to reach out to
Okay,
him.
I will. I
He's
will.
terrific, and he's a local.
Better time zone as well.
Exactly. It's probably what is it, 11 and it's 11 at night there, give or take, or 12.
Exactly. Yeah, 11 p.m. So are you on New York time? So 11 a.m.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
it's
awesome.
11:15 here.
11:15. Okay, cool. All right, wonderful. Thanks, Bill. I'll email
Great.
you
I'll
very
let you get to
soon.
your weekend.
Yeah, thank you. Bye.
Thanks, Julian. Cheers. Bye.
Bye.